Hey Hansel, how are you this week?
You know what? I'm hanging in there.
Been a tough week. Everything we understand with the Derek Chauvin stuff, it hasn't been easy.
Definitely.
Lots of things to parse
It's been
through.
very dense, very emotional, lots of stuff going on, and, in some ways very conflicting.
Well, welcome to Kingdom Thinking, everybody. My name is Josh, and with me, as always, is Hansel. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? We're going to be talking through the Derek Chauvin verdict, and we're going to be having a reaction to it, and more so specifically from a Christian response perspective, right? So by the time you're watching this video, the verdict has been out. People have been talking about this for a little while, and we wanted to jump on this, but we didn't want to just do it right away. Part of that feels a bit disingenuous to me, if I'm honest, right? To just kind of come in without letting my thoughts settle for a little bit. And that's not for everybody, and that's not a slam against anybody who did have an immediate reaction. It's just, for me, there's value in taking a few moments to process. And so, if you don't know who Derek Chauvin is, or if you haven't been paying attention for the last year, he was the officer who was responsible, according to the jury, for George Floyd's death, and he was just recently convicted of 2 different murder charges: third-degree murder, second-degree murder, and a manslaughter charge. And so after taking the time to process the news, we felt like it would be important for us to kind of have a conversation about this, both in how we feel just about the verdict, the reality, American race relations moving forward, and policing and all those kinds of conversations, but more for us in our show specifically, what's the so what response from the Christian perspective? How are we supposed to live with this news, and how are we supposed to carry it with us moving forward as it relates to the topic of race, the church and race and Christianity, race in America, and all of that as a whole. And so before we really kind of jump into that so what process, I wanted to just kind of create some space. How are you interpreting and processing all of this as it continues to move forward? Yeah,
so I feel very conflicted, to be honest with you. I've seen lots of responses, and on the one hand, I understand the kind of relief, cathartic, even metaphorical breath, right? I did appreciate Mark Davis, owner of the Raiders, alluding to a tweet, a reference, "I can breathe." I've seen it on different platforms. I get that. I've also seen the opposite reaction, the skepticism, the suspicion. Was this a fair trial? Are there reasons to think that this was biased, that he maybe there wasn't a handshake to begin with, that there were other external pressures, etc., right? And I think what saddens me most is the kind of saddle the fence faux neutrality of certain evangelical institutions that I've seen. I saw a statement recently by I'm not going to name them, an evangelical institution that said something basically along the lines of, hey, as Christians, we need to listen, learn, encourage, and empathize because everybody's having difficult feelings about this. So, just be spiritual about it. And it rubbed me the wrong way. And I don't want to be cynical or overly suspicious, but I think that it just seemed a little dishonest to me.
Sure.
I think if you're going to say that, you could have not said anything at all.
Right.
Either be honest and say, hey, we're glad this happened. We're glad he was convicted, or hey, we don't think he got a fair shake, or whatever the case. Yeah. But it seemed to CEO corporate statement, CYA kind of thing. And that's where I'm personally conflicted. It's really hard for me, on the one hand, to cheer for what could be seen as the one bearer of all guilt for all things, kind of like make an example or kind of thing. On the other hand, the necessity for accountability is real, right? And so lots of stuff that I think we can unpack, but that's where I'm at personally.
Yeah, I would have a propensity to agree with you, right? There's something in me that longs desperately for more accountability to be held for policing stuff gone awry, right? For me, the example that I draw back to fairly often is the one of Philando Castile, right? Who was a card-carrying NRA member who had a whole concealed carry, and he was still shot to death in front of his girlfriend's son, in their car, and there was no accountability for that. And so with the George Floyd stuff and everything there, it's it almost feels as though this is a stand-in for so many other missed opportunities, right, when it's come to very obvious overreaches of police malfeasance or kind of taking things too far. And then on the other side of that, in a more meta-narrative conversation, it's police are so ill-trained and ill-equipped to be able to handle a job that is so pressure filled, and it's from a perspective that I never get to sit in, right? I don't willingly sign up for a job where my main goal isn't to go home at night, right? Like, that's not the main job of a police officer. It's to be willing to sacrifice their life for someone else. Like, that's a call for the gig, right? An essential part of that willingness. And so it feels hard, if I'm honest, to speak out so flippantly, like all cops, like, I don't believe we should defund police. I'm not an ACAB supporter, right? Like, none of that makes any sense to me, particularly because that doesn't help minority communities based on their own polling and data. But the other side of that being, like, it feels like this George Floyd case has been a stand-in, right, for so many other conversations about race in America, white and black conversation and tensions, but particularly white police and, and black victims. And so part of me feels like, well, I'm happy that there's some type of accountability, like you said. It's not justice, right? People have said correctly, I think, that if justice was actually the thing in this situation, George Floyd would still be alive. The system kind of worked in some sense, right? Like, we would, in one hand or in one breath, celebrate that. But on the other side, I'm leery to be excited because there are enough things that occurred during the trial to where an appeal might grant a mistrial of some sort, as it kind of moves up the chain, because there's going to be an appeal, there's going to be more conversation. We've got some 7 or 8 weeks left to hear until sentencing. And so I still kind of sit with bated breath, and it doesn't feel like I have, for me personally, have reached any emotional
kind of satisfaction.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I saw a post earlier today from a colleague, a friend, that said, about a year ago, I was hoping and yearning for a broken system to be healed, to be mended, for a broken system to be escorted out. But what I saw was one man escorted out.
Right.
And I think he was intentionally being poetic. He's not like ignorant to the reality, right? But I can't help but feel that sense of, how much has actually changed?
Right.
And so, again, I don't want to be too cynical, right? And say, like, hey, one step at a time. Like, this is a good thing for right now. And at the same time, there was just a young man, his name escapes me right now, who was just gunned down. And, man, it's just so much, and it's exhausting. And
when it took a worldwide movement, right, to get us,
and so,
get
like,
us here.
Think about that, right? It took a worldwide movement.
Yeah, for maybe 30 years, right? Like, that would be the most that Chauvin would face.
That's incredible to me.
In
but
prison time.
Talk to me a little bit more about something that we were talking a little bit before. What do you see might be even some, like, vulnerabilities or susceptibilities of even the case itself to? Yeah,
there were some mitigating factors that made me a little bit nervous, right? I followed the trial pretty closely, and so some of the things that were commented on, right, like some of the potential witness intimidation stuff with people showing up to where they thought they were going to show for. So there was a defense witness who was testifying on behalf of Chauvin. People showed up to what they thought was his house, but it turned out to be an old address, and there was a severed pig's head with blood all over the place. Yeah, and so that type of stuff, Representative Maxine Waters showing up and talking about how if we didn't get a specific type of verdict, things were going to be problematic, right? And she was actually castigated by the judge in the courtroom like the day before sentencing occurred, right, for this. So there were enough things like that kind of piled on top of each other that make me a little bit leery that on some type of appeal, that if they go to a higher court, that there might be a judge who just says, like, yeah, you're right, like, this was a mistrial, right? The fact that it stayed in Minneapolis, there is some conversation to be had about not being able to find an impartial jury by his peer, or impartial trial by jury members who weren't, super inundated with the news, who didn't catch just a glimpse of it. The jury was never sequestered until the actual, time when they needed to render a verdict, which can be argued as problematic, right? Because they can be taking in information and stuff. And so that's not to say I'm not happy about the decision, because I think overall I am, for the most part, in the way that I can be, as far as I can be in this. But it is to say that I don't know how long that will last. And because of what we've seen in the history of our justice system, like, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if things got overturned. And I almost fear that being worse than being rendered, not guilty on all of these charges. And I just don't know how that reaction would be taken. Yeah. Because we know things would be bad if he was acquitted. Yeah. But if he's guilty and then that's overturned, like, I don't know how I would feel in that situation.
So a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
And so as we kind of try to marinate or be introspective about some of those existential realities for us, what do you think are some helpful guiding points for us and our viewers of now, as not only as people, but as Christians, as people who assume and strive to adopt the values of Christ, of the kingdom, of this otherness that transcends the sheer human instincts, right?
Yeah. So
how could we respond to this?
Yeah. So we came up with 3 kind of conversation pieces that I think are crucial for us as followers of Jesus to not only acknowledge moving forward, but to really make a central part of the way that we interact with the world as we go forward. And so the first one, to me, is always educating yourself. Yeah. I think this is a huge, huge thing. And all of these things that we're going to be talking about today are not just stuff that's come from Hansel's brain or my brain. Right? These are anchored in Scripture, right? And they're anchored in the person of Jesus. So Proverbs 18:15 reads, "An intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge." Right? Yeah. And so we have a biblical mandate to try and gather knowledge, right, as much as we can across all these types of topics, particularly when they affect our brothers and sisters, right? And these are, race relations is a thing that will forever be a topic in America. So this is a huge frustration for me personally when I'm dialoguing with people and there's just a lack of knowledge around the topic, right? There's value in being able to see that things from the perspective of our black brothers and sisters when they say, look, even though there was not an allegation of racism brought in the Chauvin trial specifically, right? Like it wasn't actually spoken to in the trial, but there was this racial undertone and this underpinning that kind of guided the whole trial and American discourse about it, right? And so there's somewhat of a disconnect there between what went on in the courtrooms on the record and kind of what was the undercurrent or off the record spot about the conversation. And so when somebody who's black tells me as a white person, like, that may not be racist in your mind, or you may not be able to see why we feel that way, but you have to understand, like, a knee on the back of the neck conversation piece is racial at the very least. Even if we don't get that, we have to say, okay, we can look at the larger meta-narrative of American discourse and history and its racial overtones, right, up until barely a generation ago, and say, at the very least, I can understand your perspective there. And if we can't get to that point, we are in a lot of trouble, not just as Christians, but just as people, right? Like, if you can't think and put yourself in the position of the other as you're trying to understand that spot, that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and so, I think of this on 2 levels, and what's particularly troubling to me is beyond the empathetic disposition to not see somebody as your enemy or the other, but we're on the same team. Not even being able to agree on facts. Not even being able to agree on kind of fundamental elements. And so things like, was he intoxicated or not, right? Did he have propensities for heart failure or breathing failure? Was that a legitimate restraining move or not, right? And it's troubling to me. On the one hand, I don't have perfect perspective. I wasn't there. And even if I was there, I'm not an expert in kind of police restraining kind of moves or whatever. But all the discourse and the back and forth that leads to kind of going back and protecting my tribe. That's very troubling to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah. We just have to keep putting ourselves in those types of uncomfortable situations. Yeah. Right. And so, one easy, really easy way to do that is just Googling. Like, Google is the most free resource that exists on the internet, right? And so taking time to be intentional in our collection of information. Yeah. But then also understanding that there's probably value in limiting punditry, right? In the consumption of that, right? Yeah. So people that just kind of hold these polemic standpoints for me are like Ben Shapiro on the far right, and then people like the Young Turks on the far left, right? Like the furthest of the right type of media commentary of which I'm aware, and then the furthest of the left media commentary that I'm aware. And like, when you consume those mainstream or alternative streams of media, like, taking the time to remember where their bias is, right? And where it's coming from and how that is going to shape everything. And then in turn, that hopefully puts in you the conversation of like, where's my bias coming from, right? Because none of us are approaching situations objectively, right? Like, that's kind of a worthless term in this dialogue there, because it's like, we can't be objective about any of these things. Correct. There. And so that becomes, I think, crucially important for us. And so what's our second thing?
Yeah. So having said that, I think the desire to educate, not for the sake of acquiring ammunition, right?
Right.
But for the sake of engaging with our second one, empathy.
Yeah.
Meaning, can I garner the ability to put myself in my neighbor's shoes? Like, what if I was white? What would that experience be for me, right? What if you were black? What if that was my family member?
Right.
What if I had, family members in the police force?
Yep.
How would I understand that differently? And so it's about a disposition, right? It's about an attitude. And I know we say this a lot. It's not about us versus them. But, I mean, how many things would be different if we really could see ourselves working towards a collective goal towards which Christians should be at the front of?
Yeah, leading the charge.
On human dignity and on things that transcend your guild, that transcend your tribe. So many conversations would be different.
Yeah.
And I would hope it wouldn't have to take a global movement to kind of come together.
Every time something atrocious happens.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, feel it as they would feel it.
Yeah.
The metaphors for the church are for a reason: body, family, the bride of Christ, the most intimate partner that you can have with somebody.
Yeah, I mean, this needs to be the most obvious one, right? Like, if you're not willing to do this, or if you're not able to do this, you're not a good follower of Jesus.
Correct.
Like, there's no other way to put it. And if you refuse to engage in this, if your default assumption is to run to your side, there's an idolatry problem that's occurring in your life, right? And to me, the issue with all of this is like, yes, there's a time for facts, there's a time for discussion, there's a time for pushback, there's a time for, statistical citations. All of those things have their place in the discussion, right? But for me, so as soon as that verdict came down, right, people that I consume on the right, mistrial needs to be moved off of. This was a total miscarriage of justice, blah, 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 blah. People automatically on the left, right? Like, this was good. It's about time. This was only one. Next, we have to dismantle the whole system. Like, it just immediately went to those things. Right. And there was no Imago Dei kind of discussion about what was lost in the person of George Floyd, or even what might be lost in the person of Chauvin.
Exactly.
And I don't want...
think about that for a second.
Yeah, well, I don't want to create a false equivalency here of saying, like, we need to, like, push Chauvin as much of a victim as we need to push Floyd. That's not what I'm saying by any stretch of the imagination, because that's not my conviction personally in this case there. But it's like, the loss of life for Floyd will never be something that can be undone this side of the grave. And my fear, though, is in the desire to dignify Floyd, because black people have been so historically marginalized in this culture, I'm afraid that in the just pop dialogue that's happening kind of around the mainstream conversation or the surface level conversations come at the expense of the Imago Dei that Chauvin has as well, right? And again, not trying to defend Chauvin by any stretch of the imagination here, but what I am trying to defend is the inherent worth that each person has in the eyes of Christ.
Right.
And I don't think it has to be one or the other.
Yeah.
And my fear is the right pushes Chauvin saying, like, hey, his life's going to be ruined over something that blah, blah, blah. And there's no attention paid to Floyd over here and the stuff that he went through, other than like a last second breath addition to, like, yeah, of course we know that the death of Floyd was bad. And it's like, but you're not sitting in that, right? Like, you try to move so quickly.
But you're not getting it.
Yeah, you try to move so quickly to your side that it becomes problematic.
No, I agree 100%, because if the only sense of relief that we're going to have for the abuses that black and brown and even Asian people now, right, are taking is the reciprocal dehumanizing of others, then I don't think we're winning.
Right. We're not, right? Like, there's such a propensity to say, like, when somebody's like, hey, another black person was shot. Well, less than 30 black people were shot by the police, unarmed in 2019, according to the Washington Post statistics. So that's not that much. Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, you might be correct in citing that fact, but timing is a heck of a lot more important. You can say the right thing the wrong way,
correct,
and still get the wrong result.
Or the right fact.
Yeah.
And the wrong like intention, or I mean, it would almost be immoral.
Yeah,
I would say to say that, right?
Yeah, especially when things are so hot, especially on the internet with strangers, right? Like when you argue again,
not the place.
There's no reason to argue with strangers on the internet on this, because you just don't end up winning anything. You just look like a jerk to the people who do know you.
And I think you put into words what I was feeling, and I was unable to say that I'm dissatisfied with the sentiment that we have to feel like we only win if we strip the other's dignity away.
Yeah.
Because mine was stripped away. Or because in this case, right, so many victims, George Floyd's was. There's got to be something better. And again, right, we are by no stretch of the imagination saying that, at least I don't think you are. We're not suggesting like, oh, hey, we're dissatisfied with the trial and there's got to be some other way. No, we're not saying that. Nope. We're saying it seems to me that a Christian perspective must start with a transcendental view of what it means to be human, and the ways that the image of God is harmed and marred can only be recovered by something more than reciprocal kind of punishment.
Yeah, reciprocal animosity.
There's something bigger than eye for an eye, right?
Yeah. Mutually assured destruction doesn't help anyone in this conversation.
Correct. Please. And so, man, I wonder, because I don't have a good answer for this. So what would have been better? You know, I don't have a good answer for that. I don't.
Yeah, so as we move into the last one here, the conversation is centered around encouraging your friends, right? Yeah. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 reads, "Therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing." People process at different rates these things, and I think it's incredibly important to step into the lives of people that we're friends with who don't look like us, specifically in this time, if you're a follower of Jesus, and check in on them about bigger conversations, right? So you can check, as people you have relational capital with, check in. How are you feeling about everything? How are you processing? But don't just ask your black friends about how they're feeling to the Chauvin trial reaction, right? Like, hey, how's your life? How's the gym? How's work there? Because we have a propensity in American dialogue to boil things down simply to the melanin in your skin or lack thereof, right? And the complexity of people is so much greater than the conversation of whether or not you're just white or black or Hispanic or whatever. In the middle. And there needs to be that conversation to occur, right? There needs to be a time and place for that. But we are far more than just those things. And so if somebody doesn't feel like talking about the trial, or if they're still processing, don't stop checking in on them, right? Ask them about other elements of their life, because it helps us remember that people care about more than just black issues, white issues, Hispanic issues, or whatever, right? And when it's appropriate, sit with them in their grief, right? Like, this is the story of Job, right? Like, you're a Job guy more than me in terms of being an Old Testament guy. So, so what do we learn in the story of Job that kind of speaks to this example in your mind?
Yeah, in my mind, I think that we are much more like Job's friends than we are helpful or that we are like God's interaction in that story. And so I think part of it is because we want quick fixes for a lot of things.
For sure.
And the desire for the situation itself to be remedied misses the point of what the call is, which is to journey through it. And that, you may not have an answer to why.
Yeah.
And so we need to give up the fantasy that we somehow have a grand perspective of why things happen and that we can fix it, or that God is interested in necessarily fixing those things. And I really do think that a Christian perspective on something like this could be, like you were saying, to journey with people through that, and not in just this cheap CEO statement way, right? But to not have to shy away from your conviction. Like, whatever way you feel about this trial, like, is fine.
Right.
Are you willing to sit with people who might not even feel the same way about you about it? That to me seems much more impressive and much more in line with a gospel value. Yeah,
and that becomes the kind of the perfect transition into what we do as the church, right? If we kind of narrow this in to land this plane, right, as we kind of wrap up here, how do we talk about race in the church, right? So the verse that I'm thinking of that everybody probably knows is Galatians 3:28 and 29, or 3:28, which reads, "There's neither Jew, Gentile, slave, free, male, or female in Christ." Yeah. So we've eliminated class, we've eliminated race, and we've eliminated like traditional gender dominance in the person of Christ, right? In the sense of they don't cease to exist.
Dignity and worth.
Yeah, but they are no longer the main identity by which we live. And there's still things that we need to work through and talk through.
They're no longer the set through which we make a hierarchy.
Yeah. Christ is above all.
Right.
But there are still specific expressions in the church of blackness, of whiteness,
Correct.
blah, blah, blah. And those things are not things to paper over. They're not things to try and tamper down.
Yeah.
But they're to be celebrated in the fullness, right? So what does, in your estimation, it look like when you talk about race in the church?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it wouldn't look like is to ask the people of color to, hey, come up with something.
Yeah.
I don't think that would be helpful. I was watching a show, and it was funny because the white character was like, oh, we need to fix racism. So do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the character was like, how ironic is it that you're asking the person who's been under the thumb of the system to also take responsibility to fix it, right?
For fixing it,
so that you could feel better.
Yep.
So I don't think that would be helpful. I also don't think it would be helpful to do like, all right, let's do a series about it so we can move on.
Yeah.
I think that there needs to be a mutual responsibility to say people have to listen, but people have to be willing to speak and educate and say, and be blunt.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I think it has to be messy.
Yeah, and this for me has probably been the place where I feel like God has been moving in my own life for the most amount of time over the last 5 or 6 years. Right, I've been having these conversations with people, kind of right at the onset of BLM after the Ferguson stuff, and for me, the conversation very quickly turned to friends who were black expressing a frustration and even a disdain, sometimes as far as using the word hate for just white people, right? And so it became kind of confusing when these conversations first started, right? Because as talking to somebody who is black would express that level of vitriol or anger or frustration or sorrow, and oftentimes all those things mixed into one. But it became a very quick kind of learning experience of saying like, this was something that they had been holding inside for so long based on so many experiences, anecdotal, real, perceived, whatever. The reality was still what the reality was for them. And so to be able to hold that space for them as somebody became a very important thing for me in this, and so this is something that I've kind of been wrestling through or talking with people that if, we can hold that space for people's vitriol and allow almost like a tea kettle situation, right? And this is not something we're called to do with everyone, but people we have deep relational intimacy with, people that, we have journeyed through the messiness of all of this with, like, what a blessing that can be as non-white or as non-black or as non-brown people that we can do this, right? Like, it's not a pat on the back. It's not like white saving. It's not, it's nothing like that. It's people being in relationship with each other who just happen to be black and white or whatever the case may be in that situation. And some of the, I think, most compelling reasoning for that is the way that I think about God's relationship with me, as a person. It's like God handles the totality of my emotional spectrum there, and God has called me to live in relationship with people the way that he and I live in relationship with each other. And if God can handle all of my emotional, unfiltered thoughts, behaviors, expressions, then maybe not with everybody, but certainly with a few people, I could probably try and live that out in some way that's valuable too. Yeah. And what that does, or what I've seen, again, I'm only speaking in my own experience here, is like it has deepened these relationships with people that I love so much, because there hasn't had to be a veil, there hasn't had to be like filtering, there hasn't had to be any type of kind of self-talk or code switching for them. Like, they've been able to just fully express that, and it's like, that's what I want. Those are the types of friendships that I want. I don't want a lot of those because I can't handle a lot of them, but a handful, right, of people that I've journeyed with, for me, this has become a very powerful thing over the last several years.
That's awesome.
And so you have any closing thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, as we wrap up, I do think some of these are really helpful, and I would encourage our Christian viewers to seek some of these out. Check in with people. And I think the value of journeying with people is the most significant thing we wanted to come across. Yeah. So what do you guys think? Leave us a comment. What would you add to a proper Christian perspective to some of these really difficult kind of topics and specifically this issue?
Yeah, we'll keep going, man. It's not going to get any easier, huh?
We'll see you guys next time on Kingdom Thinking. Make sure to leave us a comment below.